Okay, let's talk about medicine interviews, medical interviews. So I passed the UCL medical interview and the St. George's medical interview. I failed the Leicester one, so I got 2 out of 3. I didn't get invited to an interview by King's because I didn't have a high enough UCAT score, so be careful when you're applying to your medical schools in October. And because that was a mistake from my end, to be honest, I thought I could get into King's because I had good GCSEs, but turns out they don't really care about GCSEs as much as some people might think. So the strategy we go with picking medical schools before we actually get to the interview stage is one risky option, which was King's. I went with 2 medium options and then 1 safe option. So St. George's was my safe option. UCL was my second most riskiest, and then Leicester was my third riskiest, right? And weirdly, I got through UCL, not Leicester, which is usually a bit easier to get into, and I got into St. George's as well. And I'm going to go through exactly why I think I failed the Leicester interview. I'm going to cancel my camera here because it's lagging a ton, but it's really important, I think, as to why I didn't get through the Leicester interview and like how you can do different, learn from these sort of mistakes. I could make another video on medical school choice if you would want that. But let's just go through medical interviews so far. So currently, you probably just finished your UCAT exam, and you've got until around December, January, till you actually start taking interviews. You're going to start getting interview invites around like October, I believe, October, November, probably November. So you might start relaxing a bit, because that's what I did. I did my UCAT. Last year I actually had a BMAT as well, meaning it was actually 2 years ago now. But we had a second admissions exam that I had to take for UCL, so I was revising for that as well, all the way until October 15th. And then I had basically had like a whole few months of just revising. So I had predicted grades, and then I had UCAT, and then I had BMAT, and then I was finally done, and I sort of took my foot off the pedal a bit, started to chill out a bit more and take a bit more time to actually work on my A-levels, and suddenly I get hit with 3 medical interview invites, and I have to get straight back into it. So what I'd say is, if you've just finished your UCAT, just get straight into this, don't waste time, because you've got nothing else to do currently, apart from your A-levels. But this is like your last hurdle, and I'm going to get into exactly why, but I think this is actually more difficult than your A-levels and also your UCAT. So if we scroll down, I'm not actually sure how we scroll with this space. Okay. We've got here your pillars of how to get past your medical interviews. So you got your textbook. This is the textbook, or the book that everyone will recommend. It's pretty decent. It's where I got all of my information from, or the majority of my information from. So you can buy it from Amazon or whatever, or just try and find a PDF online if you can. There's so much information that you have to learn for these interviews, and I'm going to go through them actually through my mind maps on my photo library up here. But learn your information however you want. I'm not going to prescribe you how to learn information, because you're probably doing it well enough for your A-levels, and that's how you got through to the interview stage, or you think you're going to get through to the interview stage. You probably have a method to learn information, whether it's flashcards or like just taking notes or whatever it is. I'm not going to try and prescribe you how to learn that information, but learn this information in the textbook. This is a lot of information. And then go even further from the textbook and try and go to surrounding topics around that information. You want to be very knowledgeable about the NHS, about current world health crises, about even ethical scenarios that will happen as a doctor. Even, I'd say, just like general like work scenarios that will happen in the NHS, stuff like that. You want to be very knowledgeable, and as soon as you start reading this book and going through it, you'll realize how much you're expected to learn. And I had to do this. I think I had like probably like 1 to 2 months, because I finished the UCAT in October. If you're starting now, you've got loads of time. Just get really knowledgeable, and it's like an exam. The reason why I call this exam practice the next step is because the interview is like an exam. Instead of it being face to paper where you're writing to a paper, it's face to face. So you're getting examined by someone who you're speaking to. So it's, as any exam, you want to revise a ton for this, and you have to beat everyone else because it's very competitive. So do whatever you want. Revise using this textbook. You're gonna have to start using Google, YouTube videos, stuff like that, to find more information. I've got a few. So this dude, Future Doc, he's got some good information, and then we've also got this other guy called Oliver Burton, which I don't have pulled up currently, but you can just type in Oliver Burton, medical student or whatever, and pretty good information there as well. Using along with the textbook, there's a ton that you can learn. YouTube, start googling shit as well. ChatGPT is now a thing, so you can also ask them to expand on questions that you find in this book. But yeah, get your knowledge base up and try and start exam practice as soon as possible. So what I mean by this is interview practice. So you're probably going to have an MMI station, meaning you're going to have 6 different stations that you're going to go to, and each of them are different interviewer asking you a different question. And a lot of people will practice this with like a family member, which is good for, I think, practicing just your speaking skills and making sure you're not stumbling over your words. But exam practice or interview practice here is really difficult without having like a qualified doctor for you to do it with. And you can buy these interviews online. They cost like £75-100 per interview, which is really expensive. So you might have to start splashing out money. If you have a relative that's a doctor, it would work really well if you could ask them. I was lucky enough to have a relative, and they helped me out like a ton. I had like a bunch of mock interviews with them, and that's where I got the most feedback. I was able to improve the most just from this. Obviously, I had a decent base. Actually, to be honest, before I even started my mock interviews, my base was really bad because we had such short time. I started a mock interview and I really didn't know anything. I didn't know what to say. And I learnt so much from these mock interviews because I had a doctor who actually knew the answers to the questions, and they would be able to like tweak my answers and tell me exactly what I'm saying wrong. So even just like revising this textbook alone, you're probably gonna struggle with an interview. So you want to buy mock interviews, as many as you can afford at least, and it's tough because at this point it's actually just to do with money. Like this shit is so expensive. Or find someone that you know is a doctor and like try and do some practice with them, and then you want to just keep iterating back and forth between these two. And it's super important. Like this is going to differentiate you from everyone else if you're having a bunch of interview practice, because the questions are so nuanced. So I'll go through some photos of like what we end up revising for these interviews. Shit is tough, bro. I'm telling you, this is why it's I think it's more difficult than the A levels and stuff like that, because you don't have a set specification, but when you get into it, you realize like you're expected to know so much. There's like questions that they could ask on like the most random stuff, and if you're not really prepared for it, it's actually just tough to answer a question. So you can watch some of these videos like MMI examples that could be useful. But you can see like one of my first mind maps here. We've got we're talking about just general world health stuff here. So like aging population, different ideas about social care, and then there's a bunch of programs that the NHS have, like safe and well-being. I don't know why I've got a fire symbol there, but I think it's something to do with the name. You got preventative care versus like being reactive versus proactive of your care. Bunch of stuff about age. We've got down here, I think I've got stuff about inclusivity and digital exclusion. Also a bunch of ethics stuff in terms of like wastage, I believe. But I think what we went with, again, I was so lucky to have like a mentor and someone that was like actually like directing me, which is why I'm saying you probably want to spend on like mock interviews and have someone direct you, and tell you what you need to be revising more. But like I think we had, because there's a few question types where you're going to be asked like things about the world, right? Just like something that you learn about the NHS or about some public health crises recently. And I think I learned like two main things. I learned about age and how that's a big issue in the UK and different countries and stuff like that, so you can see that. And then it looks like this is not to do with that. Let me have a look if I've got anything here. Yeah, right here we've got more. So we've got like this is my like diagram. So it's like something to do with personality, something social, and then financial. There's loads of different issues in terms of healthcare. You've got stuff to do with governments, bunch of different like acronyms. So like you can see here, HIV, and like how to deal with someone that's got HIV. If you're HIV positive, it can be a really heartbreaking thing to hear about, so you have to be able to answer that sort of question as well. And then you've got another one here, so about like transplant questions. But I think there's like, yeah, you want to pick probably like one or two topics that you're gonna know a lot about in terms of like public health and stuff like that. So I chose age and something else, and I can't remember particularly what it was. But this is why it's really good to have like a mentor, something like that for this. On top of that, there's a bunch of questions you could get asked about just scenarios. So in terms of questions about yourself, there's a few frameworks that we used. So like you want to view yourself in like two different ways. So I said teacher and a leader, and then like sort of different qualities that surround that and how that ends up matching with the NHS values and doctors and stuff like that. I think there's other questions about, I mean, you can see here there's questions about abortion that could come up, and you want to be prepared for stuff like that as well. Yeah, so we're talking about knowledge, so there's questions that are just knowledge entrenched, like asking you about, like I said, health stuff, public health stuff, different scenarios about HIV, abortion, ethical questions like that. Then there's questions about you. So like I said there, where you're asked about like your qualities over there. There's also stuff asked, like for example, you'd be asked what happens if you make a mistake while you're in med school. Like a mistake might be helping someone cheat in medical school, making a mistake in for example like the operating room and stuff like that. Different frameworks for those as well that you want to be able to like use very well, because every single time they ask you one of these, it's going to be a different scenario. You can see STAR is like a really good framework here that you're able to use and just like bang this question every single time if it's asking you about a mistake. More information questions like penicillin, stuff about how medicine has become better over the years. You got sugar tax there. Challenges in med school. So again, they're going to ask questions about like, why should you come to this medical school? Like, why are you a good candidate for medical school, because it's so difficult? And there's different frameworks to answer those as well. You can see this is more information question, but it comes down to like a few different areas, right? Let me see if I've got one more over here. This is more information. This is another question type where you've got like uncertainty. So it looks like, yeah, so this is talking about, it's a scenario, so that there's so many different scenarios that they're going to ask you just to judge your character. So this could be a completely random question, like describe a scenario where you are uncertain about something and what you did about it. And the reason they ask this question, or like the way to answer this question, is first of all to describe a scenario that you're uncertain, but also use that to present a bunch of different qualities that you might have. So what we did here is I talked about being a co-leader of an equality and diversity club, and sort of talking about why that's a good thing, so presenting diversity in like a presentation, and then you go through the situation where you're uncertain, and then exactly how you deal with that situation. So you have to use a scenario that first of all helps you out, because it's putting forward like this character of you, and then also exactly how you deal with that in a way that doctors would be expected to deal with it. So I don't know if this list is comprehensive, but there's a bunch of questions on knowledge first of all. So that's why I was talking about at the start. You want to be really knowledgeable about this. And then the next type of questions are about your own character. Now your own character, you can sort of put more your own personality into these answers, and get really into it. But at the end of the day as well, like you have to end up doing stuff or talking about stuff that again puts you in a positive light. So if you're asked about a time you're uncertain or a time you made a mistake, you want to talk about a scenario that they would like. So you have to be prepared with different scenarios that you could use in these cases. And then you've got different scenarios in terms of like actual work. So like, let's say you're a doctor and like one of your doctors is drunk, and you have to deal with that as well. And you've got ethical questions as well in terms of that. So there's loads of different factors or different question types that you could get. So remember those 3 pillars. Remember not to become an Anki flashcard warrior. So don't just memorize everything. You need tons of like real world practice with like a mock MMI person, GP, ideally someone like ideally a doctor, any form of doctor, not just family members. And the reason I think I failed the Leicester exam was because I was too over memorized. I looked for, whenever I got asked a question, I got asked a bunch of questions that I just didn't expect to come up. And because I kept racking my brain to try and find an answer that I could remember, and I couldn't find anything. I just wasn't prepared to be able to say something off the cuff and be able to apply my knowledge. So that was the issue, right? I had a ton of knowledge. That's what got me through UCL and St. George's. But I wasn't able to apply that knowledge in like completely new scenarios because I was afraid of getting the question wrong. So you want to be careful of those, and you want to be able to practice those in actual scenarios with like a mock exam. There's different methods of content, right? So you can use that sort of textbook thing that I gave you up there. There's a course as well. There's a bunch of courses, but there's one specific course that I found really useful, and a bunch of YouTube videos which I've shown some already. So in terms of like course and mock MMIs, I'll link in the description the 2 things I used. They were super useful because again they were like qualified NHS people, GP, and one of them was like a deputy NHS head. So like the information that they give you is a lot better than stuff you could find out there, but shit is expensive. It's really expensive, so you have to make a choice of that. It comes down really to knowledge, having a lot of knowledge, then being able to apply it in different scenarios similar to an actual exam, and then also presence. So you don't want to just sound over memorized. So again, I think what I've put up here is I think 80% of it is having knowledge and being able to apply to it. Like a small 20% of it is actually being able to like control the room, having some presence, and not like sounding like you're just saying something word for word that you memorized, and actually sounding a bit more confident. But focus on this, right? If you have a ton of knowledge and you're able to apply it in a bunch of different scenarios, you'll have confidence, right? So don't practice confidence. There's no real reason to practice confidence. Confidence comes from competence. So if you're really competent in this and you know a bunch of different sections of, you know a bunch of knowledge like I showed in these sort of mind maps, and the confidence will come when you're able to apply it in so many different situations. So if you're getting thrown curveballs and you're able to answer them well, that's where your confidence will come from. So really focus on being able to apply that knowledge, which is, I think a lot of people, especially med students, because they're really, a lot of them will just memorize stuff for their A-levels and get through it. You can often struggle with application, and this is going to be like your main point for these interviews, being able to apply your knowledge. And I'd say that's pretty much it for med interviews. I mean, there's a few like sort of, like I said, there's a bunch of frameworks that you want to get really used to, and get used to using those frameworks to answer rather than memorizing your answers. Just get used to using frameworks to answer them. I memorized like a few answers, right? There was a few answers like, why did you choose this university and stuff like that I just memorized because I thought it's so common for it to come up. It's a good idea to be prepared and like be able to tell the interviewee a lot about the university. So there's a few answers that you want to memorize, but don't get over memorized with everything else. Look at like the core values. Try and always like come back to these when you're talking about your answers. And yeah, it's a tough process, right? It's tough. So give it your best shot. And again, look at the course and the mock interviews that I took in the description. I was lucky enough to get them for free because a relative runs them, and they're really expensive. But if you have the money, it's going to help you out so much to get past this. And this is the final hurdle. After this, you basically just have to finish your A-levels, and you're probably on track to get your grades. So make sure you get this down. Yeah, good luck.